Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today in this next instalment of our virtual seminar series, here to develop to increase your knowledge of carbon markets and connect you to the latest developments in the marketplace. I also highlight opportunities available for you to engage further as you look to achieve your corporate climate goals. Today we're joined by an esteemed panel of experts, all with many years of experience operating in carbon and environmental markets, representing some of the largest project developers here in Australia. So for those who live and breathe this industry, these organisations are likely to be household names: Corporate Carbon, Climate Friendly and Green Collar. We're very pleased to have these organisations with us today to share their insights on carbon farming, including on-the-ground engagement with landholders and other market participants, as well as forming partnerships to progress opportunities that reduce emissions, but also bring about a myriad of additional benefits to the environment and to the economy. So here at CMI, we're also proud to be the stewards of Australia's carbon markets, supporting the evolution and ensuring the integrity of the market and its participants. We act as the administrator for the Australian Carbon Industry Code of Conduct, which aims to promote market integrity, consumer protection and appropriate interaction with project stakeholders. And this code promotes best practice within the carbon reduction and sequestration industry. And all of today's presenters, in fact, are foundation signatories to the code. Brad Kerrin, my wonderful colleague here at CMI, will talk more to the latest developments with the code and its evolution, in particular with the recent independent review that was undertaken. And before we get started today, a reminder that we're continuing with this series over the next month, and you'll see on the coming slide our schedule of virtual events. I know many of you have signed up and enjoyed the entire series to date, and we look forward to having you along to all the session, particularly with session 2 starting in August. So to start proceedings today, I'd like to welcome Matthew Warnecombe, who's the Managing Director at Corporate Carbon, to be discussing technology transitions, non-traditional methods of carbon abatement and sequestration, and how some of these areas can help build back better in a post-COVID environment. Following Matt, we'll hear from Sky Glenday at Climate Friendly, followed by Dave Moore at Green Collar, and of course CMI's Brad Kerrin, before we head into a live Q&A. So please feel free to shoot through your questions at any time. Together with the other panellists, we'll do our best to answer them, either via written response or during the Q&A. You can also upvote or like any of the questions to indicate that you also want the answer to that one. That'll help us prioritise those questions during the discussion. Enough from me now. Let's head over to Matthew over in the Corporate Carbon Studios for his market insights. Thank you, Matthew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to CMI. This opportunity to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. That's on supply, and where we're going to get supply that's material not only to Australia's Paris targets, but material to a safe climate. So we've put together a few slides just to sort of set the scene with some of my thoughts. Before I get there, the comment I'd make is that all the pieces are really in place. So now what we're looking at is an exercise in focus, an exercise in priority setting, and practical innovation, and not in invention, but again, getting to the heart of the practical. How do we make those big gains? And the other comment I make too, that technology is just not shiny new bits of kit. It really is the application of that science and knowledge to save problems. In our context, the problem of how to create a safe climate. And this brings in a whole bunch of aspects, which I think is really useful in terms of our toolkit: data management, GIS, moving to predictive models, remote sensing, stats, weather forecasting. The list goes on, and of course, shiny new bits of kit. In terms of new projects, I'll just pull out a few thoughts on some minor tweaks. First of all, some new methods that I think has got application. And then just round that off with some thoughts on new approaches as to get to scale. Because again, keeping the context here, the scale that we're talking about is material to Australia's national targets and more fundamentally, material to a safe climate. So first, some minor tweaks to make some major gains. And I think that hopefully that next slide's rolled on. I'll just keep going on. We are fortunate, like in terms of, we're now a decade into the carbon farming initiative, and over that time, I think amongst the developers and the regulator and the department, there is a real body of expertise and capacity that we can bring to bear, and we're very fortunate, speaking to other developers from other parts of the world, to have a regulator like we have is quite innovative. So we think what we're looking for is more of those clean energy regulator kickstarts. Now, there's a recent one around soil carbon and a funding model to get some assistance up front to getting soil carbon baseline testing done. There's a whole raft of opportunity there for the regulator to continue taking this lead, to continue to innovate as a world-class regulator in terms of what they're doing, but to pick out some more opportunities for financing that carbon abatement and sequestration activities, kickstart some of these other methods, energy efficiency, transport come to mind, and building on to the approach and the work plan that they're doing, and to quote David Parker, in a world of big data, the need for audit almost becomes irrelevant. So as we embrace a lot of these new approaches, new technologies, we are getting more information about the projects, more information to back up the integrity of the credits that are being created. So there's an opportunity in terms of congestion busting those admin aspects, to simplify administration, simplify audit, simplify that whole monitoring, reporting, and verification, not to the detriment of integrity of the market, but actually to the enhancement, because there is so much around new tools and opportunities. As we also then approach and looking at new projects, new methods, we really do need to expand and extend those crediting periods, especially on the emissions avoidance side of things. And that's just to factor in terms of this innovative leap and some of those ramp-up curves. We're doing a longer crediting period in terms of credits to come back. And again, some minor tweaks in terms of existing methods, making them easier from that administrative process to stack, to stack on. And in particular, agriculture is ripe for this kind of opportunity. We can take soil carbon projects, BFIR, environmental plantings. In fact, any of the methods should really just be a drop-down menu available to farmers and land managers who say, yes, we want to get better. We want to get better at sequestration. We want to get better at emissions avoidance. So really, it's on us then to create that admin structure to be able to just pick and choose and make it easier to participate in in many ways. Just moving on to then some of the exciting, which we think has got a lot of potential in terms of new methods, new approach. Hydrogen is great. It is also this really fantastic opportunity. When you look at some of the recommendations from the King Review, when we start to look down different ways of innovating, for us, we're hearing from project developers, for us to also expand and think outside the box. So it would be great from a corporate carbon perspective if we actually had hydrogen operating bits of shiny new kit. But looking as to really embrace that opportunity that hydrogen presents, a new hydrogen economy, and lay down those transitional pathways where we can get involved with new methods. And here I'd highlight too the strategic importance not only of the abatement that's created, but it's the independent monitoring and verification of that abatement. It's that scorecard approach for these new technologies that's equally important. Within that, and again, as we embrace this concept of new technologies, switching out different tech, and what's continuously amazes me is there is a wealth of opportunity in terms of every aspect of the economy where there is new tech. And the other comment I'd make too, in terms of what's being talked about at a, I guess, national, even international level in terms of response to the COVID crisis, is this concept of building back better. And we can take that and integrate in terms of building back better for a better climate outcome. So it's both a challenge and opportunity. There are new technologies across every sector of the economy that do have a climate overview. So up to us to actually get on board, leverage those new technologies, and also in full recognition that's the small and medium enterprise that is the engine, the lifeblood of innovation in Australia. And that small and medium enterprise section is where climate and carbon project development is currently at. So just then going from that to round off just some of these initial thoughts and hopefully then build into what Sky and Dave talk about and ahead of the Q&A section. Just the final slide as to how do we then really get to scale. There's concepts in terms of new method and new method development and piloting. Originally, project developers could take the absolute lead. That then went back to the department. So now we have the opportunity to pilot, to co-design new methods, new approaches, but at scale. And I think there's a real opportunity for a private public partnership model. And just sitting around the office, like looking at, well, what kind of scale, what kind of size would that kind of opportunity be? Build around 5 models. We see there's potential for a $250 million plan around this private public partnership type of model to unlock those opportunities that we could develop up a platform in excess of 25 million tonnes of abatement annually through this approach. So this is really trying to harness the lessons, the experience of project developers, the skills and expertise of not only the department, but the regulator in pulling together these kind of methods, but getting to scale. And in terms of grab bag as to what these would look like, there's the landscape opportunity, which I'm sure Sky will talk at a bit more detail, but going beyond this sort of concept of forest at 20%. There's soil carbon and hybridizing existing measurement and existing models to go like a measure approach. Putting hydrogen first and center in terms of its role as a transitional fuel, in terms of the electrification of transport in particular. Blue carbon, I'm sure Dave will have a bit to say about reef credits, but again, a sizable, scalable opportunity. And another one to throw into the mix is agricultural feed. So some recent breakthroughs in terms of Asparagopsis, which is a great tongue twister to play a game at night during lockdown. Asparagopsis and also biochar, but reducing ruminant emissions. So brilliant breakthrough piece of technology, great agricultural upside and great environmental outcomes. So, really trying to get us to focus in terms of the scale that's needed and the size in terms of support of some of these pilot projects. That's all I had by way of set comments, but really looking forward to the rest of the presentations and to the Q&A session a bit later on. Thanks, Gloria.
Great, thanks very much, Matt. There's some really interesting stuff there around supply tweaks and step changes in supply to really evolve new methods and presenting a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities as well in this space. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to throw to Sky Glenday, who's the CEO at Climate Friendly, to give us some of her insights and market information. Thanks, Sky.
Thanks, Gloria. So I guess similar to Matthew, this topic of scaling up supply is really one of my favourites. It's this big opportunity in front of us, and we've learnt so much in the last 10 years that we know how to do it. I guess just a brief introduction to Climate Friendly. That we've been around now since 2003, and we really are maturing as an industry here. We're nearly 18 years old. Moving into adulthood, we'll be able to vote next year. We've had so much learning from the work we've done over the past years that we're really confident that we can partner with others in the land sector towards a net zero approach by 2050. And I guess picking up on some of the recent weeks of the carbon conversations, we heard from the state governments that they're all on board with that vision. We've heard from many industry partners that they're also there. And so for us, when we think about this supply picture, I guess that is the macro setting that we're working towards how to get this done by 2050, and that we know how to do it because we've been doing it for so long and we've learnt lessons from that first period. This year is Climate Friendly's first medium-term target of delivering 20 million tonnes by 2020, and we're on track to deliver that, and we've got plans to rapidly scale that up by 2025. In terms of the scheme more broadly, we've really already started on that journey of transformational change, and I love this little time series video that shows sign-ups of the Emissions Reduction Fund since it started. And you really see that the spaces start to fill in there and consolidate. And we see that, I guess, as proof that this is working, that this is transformational change, that it's a new way that people are thinking about managing the land. And that's delivering, a huge array of benefits, not only for the environment, but for the economy and the communities in those areas. It also gives us significant learning on how to get this done, and the unique opportunity that I think Australia has as a country with such a large land mass. At the moment, the project portfolios, our portfolio alone is over 10 million hectares, but the rangeland areas where most of these projects are 77% of the country and 590 million hectares. And you can see from the image that we haven't really yet got started in carbon farming in the high productivity agricultural areas in the country. That's 22% of the country, and at this point in time from the scheme, it's 1% of issued abatement. So I guess that's what we see as the big opportunity to scale up. How do we continue this transformation, and how do we bring online those other areas where we've got such high biodiversity values, such high carbon storage potential, and equally potential to improve land productivity and have a unique value add to the Australian economy. So I think Matthew already touched on some of these things, but we really think there's 3 simple tweaks that we can make to the scheme to get there, and that the prize, if we do this, is very large. And it's why we're focused on the land sector, while there's very important changes that need to be made in the electricity and industrial sectors to go along with this. But the one leap that we can make is really by putting different project methodologies together on one property. Often talk about this as like an accounting problem. At the moment, in those early days, as we were learning, we've focused on the international accounting rules quite rightly to make sure that we had confidence in the carbon changes on the ground, that we knew how to measure them. But that's meant we've focused on looking at trees growing or soil carbon or cattle grazing and how to reduce those emissions. We haven't put them together as a package on a property, and we're not allowing ourselves to get the full value that we can out of carbon farming. So if we can stack those methods together, we can get a lot more value, and we can make it viable in smaller areas. The properties in the higher productivity area are a lot smaller in size, but they bear the same kinds of transaction costs to get involved in carbon farming. And where we can do this bundling of approaches, we can get a lot more value and get them involved. The other things that we can do there are expand methodologies and bring online some of the new technology. And I'll talk a little bit about both of those now. So at the moment, the vast majority of the scheme is focused on regenerating the landscape through forest, but it really has this one concept that we're measuring growth in vegetation from trees that are below the forest cover threshold that will go above. We're missing a whole lot of opportunities there where there's increasing canopy across properties that really could be measured and involved in the scheme. Now that we've learned those accounting rules and we know how to measure that change, we're ready to expand that methodology and take it to the next level and measure increases in canopy across the country. That allows us to get a lot more properties involved and to really use our nature-based solutions to achieve the change. In doing that, we really need to leverage technology. And we've been doing a lot of work over the past 18 months on drones. Geospatial data just gives us a new way of bringing things online. We're able to measure these changes remotely at scales that we can't possibly measure by doing manual measurements on the ground. In the last 18 months alone, Climate Friendly has done over 2,000 drone plots covering 10,000 hectares of land, which is over 150 billion pixels of data. We're all familiar with pixels due to our iPhone cameras and what they deliver. That's a vast amount of data and insights into the land that we're managing. That really positions us to use this new technology to monitor biodiversity changes and to measure carbon increases in a more sophisticated way to allow us to make these methodology changes and take the scheme to a next level. If you're going to take these measurements by hand, I guess just as comparison, you can do much fewer plots on properties on the ground to understand the carbon content, and you're typically covering about 2% of the area that you can cover with drones. So the data and the confidence is not as high, and it's much harder to cover the vast kind of land mass that we have. So bringing these technologies online is a really important component. Coupled with that is the data management, to manage the incoming data, but importantly to help streamline things like audits. At the moment, I mentioned most of the projects are in the rangelands and not in the high productivity areas. A big part of that is that properties in the rangelands can be anything from 10 to 300,000 hectares, whereas properties in a high productivity area are more in the hundreds of hectares. These two different sizes would bear the same kind of transaction costs to get involved in carbon farming at present. Things like audits and measurement costs, they're very similar despite those very different scales. If we can use good data management and work with the regulator, then we can start to move towards things like process-based audits that drive those costs down, combined with things like drone data that reduce the measurement costs. And that allows us to go into the exciting world of things like soil carbon modelling, where we're using shared data sets to calibrate a model rather than the current approach where every landholder is required to take measurements on the ground. I guess the good news is that because we've had so many years now of implementing these projects on the ground, this isn't just 3 thought bubbles. We're actually piloting this approach already of stacking methods using the new technology and expanding how the methods work. So Climate Friendly has a land restoration fund pilot. We heard a little bit about that scheme last week. We're working there in partnership with Bush Heritage and CSIRO and applying the Accounting for Nature framework there. So, this can be done now. We're learning how to expand this portfolio, and it's something we can do quite rapidly, building on the lessons we've had to date. We recently undertook some analytics about what that would mean for the supply across the country. And, it really is a rapid step change. At the moment, there's about 570 land-based projects that are delivering over their life about 144 million ACCUs. Now, that's a fabulous start, but it's located in certain regions. If we make this package of 3 changes, we can scale that up across the country. We are bringing online a lot more regions that haven't been able to participate before, with a variety of projects spread around the country. And the outcome is really large. We're talking over a 10-year period, delivering $40 billion in value to those areas in the economy, which is, really critical in a time when we're rebuilding getting through this COVID situation that we didn't intend to be in. But importantly, that's 2.5 billion ACCU potential that could contribute towards national targets and really boost us towards that net zero goal, as well as making a contribution globally. So that's really our focus for how we can drive up supply rapidly, while there's a whole lot of other important areas to engage in. So thank you, Gloria. Looking forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, Guy. That's great. What a significant opportunity we've got there to capitalise on. Really looking forward to how the pilot projects turn out, and yes, congratulations in advance for your 18th birthday. All right, moving on now to Dave from Green Collar, who's going to join us now and talk to us about some of the exciting work they've got going on as well. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Gloria. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Just had a few technical issues the last couple of days. Look, Gloria and Brad, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with the CMI and all the various members on this webinar. It's fantastic. And thanks very much to Matt and Sky for those previous insights. Couldn't, I guess, agree with them anymore in terms of the direction we need to go to from a supply side part of the market, in terms of where the areas of focus are to really scale the ambition of where we need to get. Where as a country globally, Australia is set up, well, I guess, better than anyone in the world to I guess, utilise the benefits of nature-based solutions and carbon projects. And so, as Sky and Matt touched on, the pathway to getting there is really clear. And, we've got one of the most robust carbon markets in the world. So, it's something we should be proud of. Now, I just wanted to actually change tack a bit and actually focus on a bit of a snapshot of where we've been at as a company over the last 7 months of this year. It's been tumultuous seven months, I guess, globally and domestically from a financial perspective in terms of how people are dealing with the global pandemic. But I actually just wanted to shed some positivity in terms of our industry and where we've been going, how we've been tracking what we've been doing and the type of clients that we've been engaging. And hopefully you'll get a really positive perspective in terms of us as an industry more broadly and where it is that we're going. And so I just wanted to finish the week on a really positive note and sort of talk about some thoughts we have as an organisation. So obviously over the last 6 months, we have seen, probably not surprising to a lot of members on the phone, we've been continuing as a business, and we've actually over the last 6 months increased participation in project registrations are up by 50% year on year. So for this period of 6 months this year versus last year, our project uptake has actually increased by 50%. The actual interest and commitment from landholders is up 10% year on year from where we were last year, which I guess is not surprising in the context of the industry we work in. Individuals, SMEs, organisations are looking at opportunities to diversify income stream. A lot of the time, I guess they're thinking about what are the other opportunities that we can look at in this market, I guess, to help build resilience. And we're also seeing much more engagement from corporates, Indigenous-owned entities, conservation groups and government organisations. Interestingly, year on year, for us as a company, our forecast abatement has gone up 55% from this time last year in terms of project uptake. So that's something really exciting. And the diversification of where those projects have come from has actually broadened. So we've got projects well over in the west coast of Australia through to the east coast in the far north of Queensland, in those higher ecological landscapes around the Brigalow Belt to, as Sky talked about, those semi-arid sort of rangeland type landscapes. So starting to build a real diversity of jurisdictions and landscapes, and also methods under the existing methods that are being applied. We're seeing a broader focus outside of just human-induced regeneration methods. We're seeing much more focus on the avoided clearing method, particularly in those high value landscapes. So yeah, it's been really positive sort of 6 months, I guess, from our perspective in terms of project development. Also, we've had strong participation in the Land Restoration Fund, which Sky touched on a bit earlier. That's been a fantastic initiative by the Queensland Government. We've got 7 projects that are under that particular fund that are forecast to deliver about 350,000 tonnes of abatement over the next 10 years. So fantastic initiative. And what it actually did was it crystallised that opportunity to discreetly measure co-benefits and extract value for them. So all about optimising the value of the land use change. So rather than having this sort of amorphous, sort of opaque value of a co-benefit, we're actually discreetly measuring them, measuring the impact and optimising the outcome of any of those land use changes. And the Land Restoration Fund has been a fantastic example of that. In terms of diversity of clients, that has actually evolved quite a bit over the last 6 to 12 months. So predominantly a lot of our clients, as you could imagine, are sort of family-owned farms, pastoral companies, that we tend to deal with, but that has actually changed quite a bit over the last 6 to 12 months. We're seeing a much stronger focus from the agribusiness community, much more of a focus from the corporate sector, very much in the conservation space too. We're doing a lot of work with some key organisations in the conservation space and also at a government level. And I think that is no surprise given the focus on rural and regional Australia and opportunities for economic stimulus and jobs, and what we do as an industry, particularly in environmental markets and carbon in particular, has such huge opportunities if we sort of step back and look at what we're trying to do at a landscape scale. So that probably doesn't come as a surprise to all of you. I guess also for us as a company, which has been really exciting, has been the strategic partnership that we were able to form in the last couple of months with KKR and their Global Impact Fund. That has been a really exciting sort of shift in dial for us as a company. Having George and Chiwe and the KKR team as part of the Green Collar family really just shifts the dial in terms of our ambition and sort of validates what it is we're looking to do as an industry. We're an impact-driven organisation, we're a profit-driven organisation, but we're here to have the biggest impact and optimise that for the broadest outcome. And so to be aligned with an organisation of that strategic and global reach to, I guess, accelerate our ambition is I guess great for us as a company. It's great for our clients. It's great for the communities we work with. But it's also a great indication for us as an industry that we're sort of shifting from a cottage industry to a fully functioning, sophisticated, mature market and an industry that can lead, you know, Australia and other nations over the next sort of short, medium, long term, especially given the sort of the factors that we're facing at the moment. Claire, could you just flick that slide through? Could you just, yeah, thank you. So this, I think, really captures probably the sentiment that Matt and Sky talked about as well. But for us as an organisation, our approach is really about looking at multiple income generating opportunities that can be delivered across a single parcel. So multiple environmental assets that we can develop across a particular landscape. And so when you talk about different sort of ecosystem services and benefits or co-benefits, whatever it is you want to call them, we have a strong focus on 4 key pillars. Obviously, carbon and climate change is a big core function of our business and our participation in the carbon market. But as Matt touched on at the very beginning, we've spent the last 4 years developing a water quality market up in the Great Barrier Reef. We're really excited about that. That market mechanism is up and running. The standard's been approved. We have 3 foundation methods that are being run by Eco Markets Australia under the Reef Credit Scheme. And we have the first projects already being registered, with the issuance of credits likely to drop in the next few weeks. So it's just been such a fantastic process to go through, but it's great to actually see, I guess, the fruits of your labour and the benefits that hopefully that can bring to, I guess, a lot of those communities and agricultural managers across the Great Barrier Reef catchments in terms of being able to facilitate transformational change around improving water quality and building climate change resilience for one of the world's most important assets, being the Great Barrier Reef. So hopefully you'll hear a bit more about that in the coming month, but we have a lot of projects on the books ready to go. Please reach out if you want to hear a bit more about the Reef Credit Scheme and what's happening up in Queensland, because it's a really fantastic opportunity. I might shift on to the next slide if I could, Claire. Next slide, what I wanted to talk on was specifically about the work we're doing the last 6 to 12 months and I guess really what some of the benefits that have derived from those projects, some of the collaborations that we've been working with, and some of the exciting initiatives that we're working with particular governments. So a key focus for us as an organisation, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, has been our focus on engagement with Indigenous communities and the opportunities for benefit sharing across those communities. And that relates to not only our carbon projects, but also our other projects in our portfolio, particularly around reef credits and where those opportunities exist there. We've been really excited to partner with an organisation, Conservation Management, who is also another social enterprise. Great, deep, trusted relationships with a lot of Indigenous communities around Australia, and they have a key focus around developing healthy country planning for local communities. And for us, it was really important to have a really robust protocol and mechanism that we could say was best practice approach to, I guess, engagement with local communities, making sure that using the healthy country planning process as a way to facilitate the conversation and allow questions and benefits and discussions around what the risks are to be explored and understood by those communities before they decide if carbon farming is something that is actually right for them and for their particular country. We're also really keen to understand, well, how is it that we can bring benefits to those communities front and centre of the projects that we're looking to develop, so that there's more of a holistic approach to outcomes that benefit everyone within those local communities. So partnering with conservation management, they have a fantastic team. We've had the privilege of being able to work with Indigenous leaders such as Joan Morrison and Barry Hunter, and we've got Russell Logan as part of our team, and it's just been a privilege to start on that process and embed it into our product offering moving forward. So just wanted to touch on that as one of the key priorities for us as a business. Obviously, the other benefits, which probably don't come as a surprise to everyone, but I think it's important when we're talking about market dynamics and motivation around supply is, as you said in my earlier slide, we've seen an uptick in interest in supply project registrations, even in light of what's happened over the last 6 months. And I think the fundamental reason for that is it's not about price, it's not about the carbon price whatsoever. What it's about people understanding and being more educated in terms of what carbon farming and environmental markets are about more generally, what it is they enable or unlock. And they're obvious things that we talk about and have talked about for sort of 6 to 8 years, and it's around enabling production capacity, enterprise planning, infrastructure, drought resilience and diversification. And they're just things that I think as the market has developed and as we work across nationally in different landscapes and different jurisdictions, I think the dial has shifted in terms of the way people view carbon in the land sector. I always like to think environmental markets and agriculture are one and the same thing. They should be talked about as a single industry, not as two separate sort of approaches. And I think we're really getting there. So I think that's a big function for why we're seeing an increase in interest, engagement and project development, which I think is fantastic. As Sky touched on earlier, big focus for us as an organisation has been the work with the Accounting for Nature and the Wentworth Group. We've been working with those guys for probably close to 4 years. We've actually written a method that was submitted around vegetation management and monitoring, which has been fantastic. And we're collaborating on a bird species method and a koala habitat method with some fabulous organisations, QTFN. So that's been embedded into our, I guess, process of pre-feasibility and when we're looking at projects, particularly in different landscapes, a lot of the time up in Queensland and with the Land Restoration Fund, it's been an essential tool, I guess, to sort of help properly, discreetly measure environmental condition. What are some of those co-benefits that we can integrate into a project that can increase the value of that land use change? And the Land Restoration Fund's been a fantastic example of that. So there are the benefits that that we've derived from projects. And then one of the most exciting initiatives, I think personally for me to be working on over the last 2 years, without a doubt, has been the work that we've been able to do with the South Australian Government, particularly with the Department of Environment and Water, led by Louisa Perrin and her team, that we have been looking at the feasibility and the concept of utilising the National Reserve or conservation lands as a platform for integrating environmental markets or carbon projects as a way of facilitating a lot of the strategic goals of those particular conservation reserves, and actually using environmental markets as the catalyst or an enabler to broaden the scope of what can be done on the ground to help facilitate those strategic management plans, but also to use private sector funding as the long-term finance opportunity for looking at really fabulous opportunities like on-country employment and setting up ranger programs for local communities that abut onto those conservation reserves. And we think that there's just huge scope for opportunity in that landscape. And I think it will hopefully be developed as a model that other governments, state governments, can roll out on their conservation reserves. And so we've been fortunate enough to work with a great consortium on that initiative, obviously with the South Australian Government, but we're working with Biodiverse Carbon Conservation, Conservation Management. We've been a key member of that consortium, and BP Low Carbon Trading have also been involved in that process. So Yeah, that's just a bit of a snapshot from, I guess, our perspective over the last 6 months, and hopefully it just gives you a bit of those in the industry a bit of confidence that things are absolutely moving in the right direction, and it's sort of really exciting place to be, I guess, in light of what's happening at the moment. So thank you, Gloria.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, really positive story there, and so interesting to see the diversity of people involved in this environment now. And our little small cottage, you said, that's coming to a significant marketplace now is really growing. So great to see that. I'll just pass over to Brad now for a brief update on the Code of Conduct and how that's tracking along before we move into the Q&A. I can see many questions coming through, so we'll try to start answering them now in the chat, but we'll get through to them very soon. So Brad, over to you for an update on the code, please.
Thanks, Gloria. I always relish an opportunity to dive into the exciting and fast-paced world of voluntary carbon code compliance. But look, it is timely for us now to just give a bit of an update on where we are with the code and how it's transitioning, where we've been and sort of where we're going in the coming weeks and months. So the code was launched in 2018 with a vision to achieve a well-functioning emissions reduction and carbon sequestration industry in Australia, but at a scale required to significantly contribute to Australia's Paris commitments. The code's role in the carbon market really is developing to do a number of things, namely to define pathways towards industry best practice for market participants, to promote consumer protection and appropriate and open interaction with clients in both the supply and the demand sides of the market, to provide guidance on appropriate practices to scheme participants, and critically to promote market integrity, transparency and accountability. Now the code was designed to operate in 2 stages: an initial 2-year limited light touch foundational stage that would set up and prepare the code for full implementation in the operational stage. The secondary stage includes the expansion of the administrator's functions to include audit and investigation, complaints handling, sanctions and penalties, and the creation of an independent code review panel to oversee these activities. And that operational stage is commenced on the 1st of July 2020. The code itself currently has 14 signatories, including our initial 12 foundation signatories, you can see there at the top, and then 3 additional signatories that have been onboarded in the last 12 months. And it's worth noting here that although the majority of our early signatories were carbon project developers and service providers, the code has a much wider reach. And we're in the process of onboarding another 5 signatories at the moment. And interestingly, we're seeing an increase in applications from trading, legal and professional service providers. And we're hopeful that as more market participants across various disciplines are working towards best practice, we'll see higher standards of integrity, transparency and accountability will be embedded in our domestic carbon market, which should help the market become a safer place to buy, sell and participate. So ahead of the operational stage that I mentioned, the Code of Conduct administrator undertook an independent review and public consultation process, and the administrator is due to release its formal response to these processes and its high-level transition plan at the end of this month, so by the end of next week. Ahead of this release, I did want to note that the administrator has assessed the 46 recommendations as part of that review process, and all of those have either been approved for design and implementation or marked for further exploration, mainly to ensure appropriate interpretation and application, and whether it is indeed the code's role to explore some of those issues, but no recommendations have been outrightly rejected. Most critically, I think in the first instance, CMI has agreed to continue as the code administrator in the operational stage from the 1st of July 2020, as was recommended, and that first 12 months will be a transitional year during which the administrator will undertake the design and development of new financial and legal frameworks, expand the internal systems and processes, and build out the administrator team. And what this will do is put the administrator in the position to consult on and fully implement changes for the code's next compliance year that will begin on the 1st of July 2021. So during this transitional year that we've now just begun, the signatory compliance requirements will remain unchanged, and of course signatories will be consulted on and be made aware of all new compliance responsibilities and changes well in advance of the next compliance year. Finally, the last thing I wanted to note is that in the coming months we'll be extending our market engagement in the form of formal government partnerships, really to use the code to assist policymakers to embed higher quality, integrity, transparency and accountability frameworks within various state and federal government policy frameworks. The Queensland Government has confirmed, for example, that code signatory status is an eligibility requirement for entities accessing its Land Restoration Fund. So we're hopeful that the code can facilitate additional and other sorts of arrangements in other schemes around the country. Furthermore, we'll also be looking at how the code can be used as a demand-side assurance tool for those entities and market participants looking to buy and purchase and participate in other ways in the market, really to help them manage risks around assurance, around integrity, transparency and accountability. And we'll be consulting with industry shortly to discuss how companies can become industry supporters of the code. Additional things that we'll share with that report next week are really how we will continue to improve the code's treatment of eligible interest holder consents, engagement with Indigenous communities, and looking at how we expand outside of just more that supply side focus, but to the demand side focus as well, as I mentioned. So just to close, look, we've got a big task ahead of us as the administrator in expanding the code into this operational stage, but it's exciting to be building something that will help make market participation safer and more mature, but also help position Australia's carbon market, its participants and emissions reduction activities as world-class and a more investable market for domestic and international investment. We'll have more to share in the coming weeks and months, and of course welcome your consideration of becoming a code signatory at any time. You can read more on our website and feel free to get in touch with us via email if you have any questions. Thanks very much for your time, and look forward to any questions as they come.
Great, thanks Brad. Really a very wonderful initiative that the industry's put together to develop that code, and it's a really important part of our ongoing engagement and operation in this environment. I'd now like to move to a Q&A. We've got lots of questions that have come through and a few of them have already started to be answered. I will bundle a few together given the time we've got left. Just looking at the first one around method stacking and data. We've spoken and heard from most people today about the improved outcomes and cost reductions that come with the use of big data and also the method stacking approach. There's a question here, I think, directed at Matt for what this sophistication in data means for the regulatory environment and verification. If you've got any comments on that in terms of the audit landscape, cost, work involved.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria. So there still will be a requirement for independent verification. I guess what we're pointing to is that better data, better quality data at a greater level of granularity that is able to be verified, almost instantly, focuses that task and reduces the overall complexity. And then just to back up what Sky's comment too about process-based audits, where we can audit the whole systems of the developers. As another layer of assurance in terms of those individual outcomes, and this very much also touches on the size of the project and how different size projects are put together. But a classic case is I think conceptually people would agree that if a farmer is seeking to carbon farm, they're looking to avoid emissions and store as much carbon as possible in their landscape. So whether or not it's 3 or 4 or 5 different project types, there should just be the one audit. So at the moment, one of I guess the barriers to going down that pathway is having to do 5 independent audits, and the cost of an audit is relatively immaterial to the size of the actual ACCU issuance. So there is huge scope for innovation there. And as I said, it doesn't. There still will be independent verification, but targets and focuses that activity.
Cool, thanks. Thank you. Sky, did you have anything to add to that?
Look, I think we've largely covered that in the chats and there, but as Matthew says, the main thing is that we're not taking away any integrity. It's just looking at ways to be more efficient now that we know how to do that accounting after years of experience.
Yeah, well said. There's one of the most liked questions today we've got here just around bushfires. I might stick with you on this one, Skye, just in terms of that sequestration and permanence around that and what that means for projects that you guys are working on. I know the regulators come out this week with a guidance document around that, a draft guidance document. I'm not sure if you wanted to talk more to that, Skye, while we've got you here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, these bushfires were obviously unexpected, but unfortunately we live in a world where we can expect them more often. So it's a really critical question, and I think there's a few different components. One is around, I guess, liabilities, and I don't think that this should be the focus, but it is important to recognise that these kind of catastrophic bushfires are beyond our current means of control. So if a farmer was undertaking carbon farming, this is seen as a natural disturbance and they're not penalised. But obviously the goal of carbon farming is to store these emissions and to reduce global emissions. So we very much want resilience in the projects we're building, and we want to avoid future fire seasons like we've seen to the extent that that's controllable. It's a really different topic depending on what part of the country we're in, and we need regional solutions on how to manage these bushfires. A lot of the projects at the moment are in these rangelands, which are currently less fire prone. But as Gloria said, the regulator has just released, I guess, some guidance reflecting existing regulations as we're heading towards those fire seasons, and we've had some of the best rainfall that we've had in a very long time. The farmers on the ground in our projects are actively putting in place measures at the moment to manage any kinds of fire risk, and I guess that's a key part of why we talk about this being active landscape management. There are boots on the ground managing these properties, taking actions to try to build that resilience into the landscape. It's a slightly different issue in the higher productivity areas where we saw most of the catastrophic fires occurring. And I think it's a multi-tiered approach to how we address it in those contexts, so that the carbon being stored is kept in the ground. And a large part of it relates to the firefighting and management capacity that the state governments and regional organisations are working through, as much as thinking about things like fire retardant species that can be planted. So, strategic methods for how we put these projects on the ground. So it's a really, really core consideration going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Dave, I've got a question here for you on carbon projects in South Australia, conservation reserves, and how you meet the newness requirements. Is that something you want to talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you would recall, but the human-induced regeneration method, probably, I think it was around circa 2016, had a variation made to it that actually captured conservation reserves, because previous to that, it was only basically private land that could be captured under the method. And there was a very good reason for that. I think that amendment was pushed by the Office of Environment and Heritage, New South Wales in particular. But obviously there's a lot of land within the National Reserve, although it sits under the term of National Reserve or conservation land, is still subject to significant suppression. Whatever, we just see it. We see it all the time. There's suppression that impacts those landscapes, and there is huge scope to actually increase and expand the level of programs and opportunities that can help reduce that suppression over time. So there's absolutely strong additionality built into the method to capture that, and the method has a variation that I guess focuses very specifically on suppression through feral animal pressure. So one of the big focus on any landscape, particularly in the rangelands, is around total grazing pressure. It's something that people have to deal with every day of the week and try and reduce, and that can be through native herbivores, can be through domestic livestock and feral animals. Those same factors impact national parks and conservation reserves, and the same sort of mechanisms need to be implemented in many instances to manage that suppressive factor, and that's that significant investment in infrastructure, eradication programs, a whole host of things. So yeah, there's very, very strong additionality in terms of some of those opportunities on those landscapes.
Great. Okay. And while I'm with you, Dave, you mentioned earlier there's a lot of interest from new businesses, I guess, coming through from either agribusiness or corporate sector and government level. Do you have some comments around, I guess, some of the key drivers for that shift and what's really driving engagement from those areas?
Yeah, sure. I think we're shifting from a sort of a strategy phase to an implementation phase. So particularly for a lot of people that work in this space, we've all talked to a lot of corporate organisations and different entities over the last 3 to 5 years, and there's been a strong interest at a strategic level to talk about, net zero emissions targets, alignment with sustainability objectives, and it's all been extremely positive, very high level, but strategic, and not so much about implementation. And I think where we're at now, it's just where we are in the cycle of the industry, that I think a lot of corporates in particular have very well formed and firmed up sustainability strategies. They have strong alignment in terms of sustainable development goals they're looking to align with. They've got strong, I guess, pushback from shareholders, directors, they've got directors' obligations. There's just a whole, I guess, matrix of different factors that have really led everyone to the position now where it's about implementation. So I think it's partly just a circumstance of where we are in terms of timing, that a lot of corporates and agribusiness clients, for example, are now looking at what can we do now to, I guess, manifest and sort of achieve our sustainability targets that we might have set over the previous 3 to 5 years. So I think it's partly that. On the government side of things, I think particularly over the last 6 months, a lot of the, what we've been experiencing from, COVID-19 and the global pandemic, and I guess the issues around unemployment, and that just, I guess, exacerbates the idea of needing to create jobs and economic opportunities and economic stimulus in regional communities. And what we do, like what Matt does, what Sky does, what we all do, is the best vehicle for injecting large capital, broad opportunities not linked to government funding into regional areas. Like it's evidence-based, we've done it already. We've got examples in different regions that we work in where it's been hugely successful. And so there's a fantastic opportunity to use what we've done, use the learnings we've done over the last 8 years and roll it out in landscapes where governments can just act as enablers and sort of enable good policy, so that I guess we as an industry can get on with what we're good at doing that. And actually using private sector funding to sort of facilitate a lot of these outcomes. It shouldn't all be on the government to try and fund this stuff. It should be about enabling the best market conditions for all of us to be able to unlock the most opportunity to the most amount of people. So.
Yeah, it's really an evolving area, and it's definitely growing from a lot of angles. We're kind of nearing the end of time here. I just wanted to throw one more question, maybe both to Matt and Sky, just around some of those pilot projects. I can see, Matt, you've answered one around whether they're already being commercialised. And I know, Sky, you're heavily involved with Climate Friendly with some of those pilots. Perhaps just a few comments on some examples of what they look like and how they're tracking and where you see the biggest opportunities are in the future for those pilots. Might throw to you first, Sky, and then we'll end with Matt.
Thanks, Gloria. Look, great question. I guess the pilots, now we are using the framework we have to commercialise them from the outset, but we're also using them as proof of concept for these changes that we're working on, with others in the industry and the government. A really important conversation that we've had with the government is, in the history of the scheme, we designed it and then tried to implement it, and we'd like to move to a new approach where we pilot it and then legislate it. It just means that we get the rules right from the beginning, because otherwise we typically find that we've got methods that don't quite align with the reality on the ground. And that can be seen from the existing suite of methods. There's 37 methods and about 12 of them have issued credits. It's not because there's not valid activities in those other methods. It's because there's minor challenges in how we actually implement them, in the reality on the ground. And I think there was a related question around, marketing those internationally as well as domestically. obviously that will be a decision over time for the government, but there's growing interest internationally in the ACCU market, and CMI, you know, is very good at pushing these kind of linkages, supporting the industry on that basis. I think given the size of Australia's land sector and what we've got to contribute here, it's a really obvious step that we can not only help to deliver a carbon neutral Australia, but we can actually have this as another export commodity from our land sector that goes along with, you know, carbon neutral products from the farm gate as well. So it's a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Guy. Matt, any last comments from you?
Just maybe just picking up on Sky's comment, is really with this pilot approach, it's all about learning by doing. So we do have decades now of experience to draw upon, and in looking to sort of doing these things side by side with existing frameworks. But it's also looking at the funding mechanisms for the pilots and how they might flow, and structurally making sure that that's right and that's set from the get-go, so we can make these big leapfrogs forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. I think we'll have to end it there today. Thank you to all the panellists, Matt, Sky, Dave, Brad, all one syllable, good Australian names. Thanks to the team behind the scenes again for supporting with this, and all of you, our participants, for coming here today to join us. This is the last in our seminar series for this first series, as you can see. But don't be too sad, we will return in a couple of weeks for series 2, where we dive into some of the practicalities of carbon market strategy, trading and procurement, looking at the business case for setting climate carbon goals, carbon neutrality and the Climate Active program, how organisations are going about their climate journey, and insights from market advisors, brokers and traders with deep experience in carbon, energy and environmental markets. I also do want to highlight that during this series break, we have 2 exciting carbon conversations taking place over the next 2 Fridays. Registrations are now open for those. The next Friday, 31st of July, we've got an Indigenous-focused carbon conversation. We'll be joined by Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, the Kimberley Land Council and the Indigenous Carbon Industry Network. And the following week, Friday, 7th of August, we're heading over to New Zealand virtually for a Kiwi carbon conversation with the New Zealand Minister for Climate Change, the Honourable James Shaw, and he'll be joined with the New Zealand Climate Change Commission and New Zealand Carbon Farming Group. So we do hope you can make it along to those 2 upcoming carbon conversations during the break, and we look forward to seeing you for series 2 of this virtual seminar series on participating in Australia's carbon market. So thanks again and have a great Friday.
Thanks, Gloria.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.